Shalom, friends. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. We are delighted to come together again. Rabbis, cantors, lawyers, law professors, activists of different denominations and areas of expertise and engagement. For an extremely important session of our webinars, co-sponsored with the Chidush, Ruach Chidush, Rabbis and Cantors for Religious Freedom and Equality in Israel, the American Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists, and JPLAN, the Jewish Pluralism Legal Action Network. The session will be moderated by Harold Halpern, one of the leaders of the American Association, and don't be confused by the name that appears under his face. This is all technology. And then questions and answers will be organized by Judge Peter Buxbaum, co-chair of JPLAN, the Jewish Pluralism Legal Action Network. So a word about questions. You may write your questions, make comments using the chat. Peter Buxbaum will be monitoring them, and after the introduction to the topic that will be made by Professor Navot, he will present them to Professor Navot. And again, before I hand it over to Harold, I don't think we have organized many such important webinars, sessions, discussions as this one week before the elections, with such a critically important issue that is pending, threatening Israel, and by extension the Jewish people. Is the one that we will be hearing about from Professor Navot. Harold, the microphone is yours.
Oh, thank you very much. Susie, I assume that Professor Navot is on. And I'd like to, I want to get to her rather than to me, but let me just preliminarily say, here we're dealing with the threat in the current election to the independence of the judicial system in Israel. When our group was in Israel in 2019, meeting with Justice Barak and other justices, think tanks, people of interest, the question of the power of the Knesset to override the decisions of the Supreme Court, even on what I call constitutional issues, violations of the basic law, was a hot topic. And a concern that the Knesset would adopt the right of override. Then in the last year, under the coalition led by Prime Minister Bennett, the issue sort of waned. And when we were, again, bringing ourselves up to date by our mission in May of 2019, the issue was beginning to renew itself. So my question now, Professor, is what is the danger of a new government adopting a right of override? And maybe you can give us a brief explanation of what that means and how it could possibly be ameliorated.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much, Rabbi Regev, Steve, and Harold, for this invitation to speak about the override, but I will speak about something else as well, if you allow me. Okay, this is a very good question, but I would like to start in another place. We are a few days before elections. We are hearing about new proposals for legal reforms, some of them posing a real threat to Israeli democracy. But first, a small disclaimer. It may be a depressing talk, so I'm sorry about it. It's morning, in the USA, so you have all day to overcome. For us, is a little bit different. Let me start with a very short overview of something that is global and is impacting Israel, and the override has to do with it. I am sure you all know, you're very well aware that the global trend now is populism. Along with the rise of populism in recent years in several countries, we are witnessing also a trend of, we may call it a democratic erosion. Democracies do not longer die in one day. We do not see violent coups that overthrow a government. Almost, we do not see it. Democracies wear out slowly, and sometimes out of sight. You notice small changes that when you look at each other, or each and every one of them separately, they may seem even harmless. An amendment here to this, the court, an amendment there to the television and radio, but it's the quantity that makes the quality. And this trend is here. It's very hard to put a finger on a specific day where the populist movement made aliyah to Israel. But there is no doubt that it's here, and for a few years now. It's only getting stronger. We have an ongoing fight against independent bodies such as the media, human rights organizations, NGOs, an ongoing attack on the courts for a few years now, a weakening of the gatekeepers, a strong denial of any kind of limitation for government. They do not want any kind of limitation to their power. We are witnessing a delegitimization of opinion and of people. The elections next week, the motto of the elections next week is us versus them, all the time. This is something that you have heard before in Poland, in Hungary, and in other countries. Now, the constitutional structure of the government of Israel exposes it to the dangers of populism even more than any other democratic country. Because in every country, like the USA, for example, you have mechanisms, you have tools that decentralize the political power. You have checks and balances, the splitting of the legislative authority, two houses, of the Congress and the Senate, the right of veto given to the president on legislation. You have a federal structure, a regional electoral system, and sometimes in Europe, for example, even the existence of international courts. All of these are tools that decentralize power and are part of these checks and balances, but none of them exist in Israel. Israel is unique. It's unique in so many marvelous ways. I'm sure you agree with me in that. But it's unique because Israel is the only country among countries defined as free countries that does not have any tool for this decentralization of political power. And in addition to that, we are in a chronic state of regime instability. Next week, we will have the 5th elections in 3.5 years. Now, the most important feature about Israel, in my opinion, is the fact that unlike any other place in the world, any ordinary majority of the Knesset may change the rules of the game. Any ordinary majority of the Knesset can enact and amend any basic law in a normal lawmaking procedure in 3 readings and even in 1 day. It means that the politicians in Israel have the possibility to change the constitutional rules, the system of government, and I would say even the nature of Israel, by a simple majority, even in order to benefit those in power at a given moment. So the constitutional order of this country is under constant threat of immediate change. The government, perhaps the president, and of course the courts. And I know that you follow what is going on in Israel nowadays. I'm sure you have heard the magic number 61. 61 is the minimal number of members of Knesset needed to form a government, a coalition. But 61 has a completely different meaning. 61 is all you need, like the song of the Beatles, all you need is love. Here in Israel, is all you need is 61. All you need is 61 to change Israel's constitution, to change the power of the court, the system of government, to become a presidential state, a monarchy, a non-democratic country, to limit or even delete any human right, equality, freedom of speech, just name it. And of course, 61 can provide for any kind of immunity for a prime minister or even cancel an ongoing trial. Imagine that there is an ongoing trial against a political leader. Anything, just name it. In Israel, 61 is absolute power. Absolute power. So when you hear one strong political leader that is involved in a criminal proceeding against him saying, give me 61, and his partners from a different party propose to restart or reboot the legal system by adopting almost I think 20 different changes and reforms to Israel, some of them unheard of in any democratic country, they know what they're speaking about. They can do it. Like Obama used to say, yes, we can. Yes, they can. So this is the overview that you have to understand when we speak about not only the override clause, but perhaps the program that we have seen last week from the Zionist Jewish party. Now, let me explain the idea of an override clause. What is this override that everybody's speaking about? And of course, it appears also in this program. In Israel, we have basic laws. I'm sure most of you are well aware of it, which are above normal laws. It's a kind of constitution, but a very weak one because they may be changed and amended and even deleted by a simple majority of 61, most of them. But the human rights in the basic laws, like every other place in the world, they are not absolute. The Knesset may limit them. Okay, the Knesset may infringe upon a right, but the Knesset has to do it according to the rules established in those basic laws. And the rules are very simple. The state, meaning Israel, the Knesset, may limit or may infringe upon the rights if this limitation, if this infringement is proportionate and for a good or a proper purpose. These have been the rules of the game for 30 years now. So what happens is the Knesset wants to enact a law that violates a right, but the limitation is extreme, something that unheard of. For example, we have two kinds of citizens. Citizens that are they have less rights than other ones. Can the Knesset do that? If they pass a law saying something like that, it will be an unconstitutional law. And then the Supreme Court may judicially review this law. For a period of almost 30 years now, about 20 laws, mainly sections, have been declared unconstitutional. It means that the court is very, very limited itself. It does not make any conflict with the Knesset. And now what is the override? It's a section that will allow the Knesset to enact laws that infringe human rights, even if these laws are extreme, disproportionate, and for a wrong purpose. If 61 members of Knesset want it, it means that if the majority wants it, that's what will happen. Majority rules. And if the court will declare void or unconstitutional this law because it infringes our human rights in a disproportionate way, the majority of the Knesset will be able to enact it again because this is the will of the majority. Perhaps to some of you may sound democratic. This is what the majority rules. But democracy is not only the rule of the majority, definitely not. It's also an effective protection of human rights, especially the rights of the minorities. And aren't all of us a minority sometimes? You know, in Sefer Shmot, in Yud Gimel, I would say something in Hebrew, Veigadita levincha bayom hahu le'emor. In every generation, one must look upon himself as if he or she personally has come out of Egypt. And I said, okay, I like very much this sentence because every one of us might see himself sometimes as a minority. And then if the majority can, limit, infringe, violate the rights of the minority by a simple majority of the Knesset, what have we done? The override rule is actually intended to allow the Knesset to overcome not the Supreme Court. It's not a fight between the Supreme Court and the Knesset as it is presented to the public. The override rule is actually intended to allow the Knesset to overcome us. It's all about our rights. It will allow our rights to be limited in a disproportionate way. Equality, freedom of speech, a woman's right to her body, freedom of religion, the right to property. So even in those rare cases, actually they are very rare, in which the court exercises its power for judicial review, the Knesset will be able, with a normal coalition of 61, to reenact this law, and it will remain in effect for 4 years, after which it can be permanently extended. It means, again, that a political majority will always be able to deny the minority its rights. Now, having said that, I am not against it. I think an override clause may be suitable for Israel in a very specific context and as part of a constitutional compromise between all its tribes, if I may use the word that former President Rivlin used. A compromise between coalition, opposition, the Jews and Arabs, religious and secular. A compromise that will give us constitutional protection to all the institutions in Israel, to the fundamental values of the state, Jewish and democratic, to the human rights. If this compromise would be reached, then perhaps we can speak about an override clause with a very high demand of a majority of 80 perhaps for a very short time in order to accommodate changes that the Knesset may want to do. But I think the most important thing that Israel can do to stabilize, I think, the system and to avoid this abuse of power is to pass a basic law dealing with the legislature, with entrenching, protecting the basic laws. Okay, the proper constitution, giving the constitutional a shield, a kippat barzel, like we used to say in Israel, for the fundamental values, at 2/3 majorities of the Knesset, 80 members. Now, let me just tell you, Annette, something apart. In this government that we have had for the last year, Gideon Sa'ar, the Minister of Justice, he established a public commission representing the 8 parties in the coalition to prepare a draft for this basic law on the legislation and basic laws. This basic law has been discussed in Israel since 1975, okay? And no compromise and nothing has been done since. Now, these 8 people in the commission, okay, representing the 8 parties, okay, actually formed this commission, and 3 of the parties decided not to send members of the Knesset to this commission to prepare this basic law, but to send professionals instead of politicians. Meretz asked Professor Kremnitzer to join the coalition, and I was asked by Merav Michaeli. She was a former student of mine, to take part in this committee. And actually, I accepted, and I said, I don't care who asks me, even if Ayelet Shaked or Gideon Sa'ar asks me to go, I will be there, because you have the possibility perhaps to change what is happening in Israel. But there were 2 problems here. The first one is that not all the parties in the Knesset were represented, because there was the coalition and the opposition did not work together at all. And the second problem was that we only had 4 sessions of this commission, and the Knesset decided to disperse. So now it's over. And I really am sad about it. Because if such basic law was actually such compromise between parties that are the right and the left together, and if such a basic law was passed, then perhaps a specific override may be suitable, a mechanism that will not apply to all the rights.
May I interrupt you with a question?
Sure. All the time.
The polls, for whatever their value are showing that the right wing pro-Netanyahu coalition is hovering close to 61 at 60. As a practical reality, if the right-wing coalition should be able to form a government, what is the likelihood of the kind of compromise you suggest being adopted, given your earlier comments, we're living in a populist period, and given the comments by the extreme right party, that it will be a condition of their joining a coalition that such a right be adopted. What do you think is the practical possibilities of a compromise as you suggest, and what is the practical likelihood of an override being adopted without that protection?
You know, Harold, I'm an Israeli, but I'm not a prophet, and this is a question that I am not able to answer because it's not a legal question. That is my, things that I actually did. I do not know. I know what is in front of me. I know the plan presented last week by the religious Zionist leader Bezalel Smotrich, the legal plan. And I know, and I heard him and his partners saying that if they join this 61 coalition of Netanyahu, this is what they intend to pass. The plan is called Law and Justice. By the way, Law and Justice is the name of the ruling party in Poland. And I suggest that you see what this ruling party in Poland has done. And whoever reads the platform of that party will discover that the similarity between the Israeli version and the Polish version does not end only in the name. And if this is passed, we will not see any compromise, Harold. Compromise is not the word that it's going to be used. It's what we're going to see is what they say, a reboot or a restart of Israel's constitutional law. The plan says we want to restart the legal system. And when I think of this restart, when I do it to my computer, the first thing that I see is just black. And I think that restarting, if you read the plan, and I suggest you read the plan, it actually proposes to delete and to erase everything in Israel that is independent, professional, and objective. The judiciary, the public service, everything will become the government's. It must be ours, like the populist trend. If it's not ours, then it cannot exist. The politicians in power want their judicial system. They want the Attorney General, the Chief of Staff, the Police Commissioner, the head of the Mossad, the head of the Shin Bet, and of course the judges, the control over the appointment of all judges. Perhaps it may be familiar to you, to a presidential system. You change, of course, the civil service, and okay, the way of appointment of judges in the United States. But still, you in the USA, you have checks and balances and a constitution. We do not have them. So when this plan cancels the separation of power and concentrates all power in the hands of the government, I see it as a real threat to democracy, because it aims at weakening the public legal attorneys, damage the independence of the judiciary in a way that will not allow any effective control to government. No control at all. The public service will be theirs. the access to the public service will be left only to those that are close to the government and not to the others. It will have a direct impact on the level of public services, on health, education, welfare. And of course, what is most important for me is, please, the program says we have to remove all tools for control or oversight of government. Now, we know in all the countries that I know, the constitution limits the legislative power of the majority. Okay? Even in England, that you don't have a formal constitution, there are alternative restraining mechanisms that limit the power of the majority to harm the minority. European Court of Human Rights, for example. But we don't have them, and we don't have this culture.
Let me come in at a point there. Let's assume the worst happens and the right of override is adopted without limitation. Mm-hmm. And the declaration of the Proclamation of Independence of Israel proclaims Israel to be a democratic state. Could this not be a constitutional crisis? And the Supreme Court actually engaged in reviewing any right of override as in violation of a fundamental nature of the state from a democracy.
Harold, you know, you're a great student of mine, and I may say that. Do you think the Supreme Court will be there? Do you really think? Do you know what they did in Poland when this problem arose? They asked the judges, how old are you? Remind me of your age. 66, 67, no problem. The first law we passed is we send the judges to retire instead of the age of 70 at the age of 65. And that's all, very simple. Now, I don't think about this kind of solution, but the solution is not to take the Declaration of Independence and go to the court and ask the court to give the Declaration of Independence constitutional status. I wish we could do that. I hope. I am even more optimistic than you are. I hope the court will be there for us. But the override clause does not come alone. The override clause has another section saying that the court will not be able to interfere they will not have the power for judicial review of any basic law. And they will not have the power to judicially review any act of government. So what would the court say? I will declare void all of these reforms. Is the Supreme Court so strong? I am not sure anymore. I am really not sure.
There's no certainty about it, but it's a reach. I think we discussed it the last time we were together, of reading the Declaration of Independence into the decisions of the Supreme Court. It's a desperate effort, but an override clause without condition is a destruction, as you point out, of democracy. So that's a last resort.
Exactly. So this is the last. You have only one possibility of limitation of these powers, of these reforms, of this override clause, and that's the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court is able, wants to, decided to do that. What I see is that there is no other kind of limitation, no other kind of control, not other kind of oversight to the decisions of 61 to do so. Let's hope that the court will be there, and let's hope that your proposition will be heard in the court, and the court will say, okay, this override clause, I declare it void. What happens the next morning in Israel? If the majority wants it, and 61 is the magic number, they will have it. They did this. Let me just remind you of this reform last time, the Gantz-Netanyahu reform on the basic law on the government. They did, in 36 hours, they changed the system of government into a two-headed, government. I have never heard of such a model. Okay, 2 prime ministers serving at the same time. One as a, okay, one in the moment, and then one like a nearby him. It's been done.
Yeah, certainly as we began, we say there's a crisis, a constitutional crisis. I've been asked as a question that came over to discuss the manner of judicial appointments in Israel.
Okay, the judicial appointment in Israel is different from what you know in the United States. We have a committee for the selection of judges, and this is a committee that is actually a sort of a mix of different branches of government altogether. It's a checks and balances idea. The committee is of 9 persons. 3 of them are ministers, headed by the Minister of Justice. Okay. Sorry, 2 ministers, 2 members of the Knesset, that's 4, 2 members of the Israeli Bar, that's 6, and 3 Supreme Court judges. So you have all the branches of government, the judicial branch, the professional branch, the Israeli Bar Association, you have the government, and you have the Knesset all together. And in order to appoint Supreme Court judges, you need a majority of 7 out of 9. And, you know, they say that if it works, don't fix it. And for the last, I think, over 70 years, almost, it has been working not bad at all. We had marvelous judges in the Supreme Court of Israel, brave judges, independent judges, some of them more activist than others, but I don't even, it's not an innuendo that activism is good or bad, and some of them not. And it reflects the society of Israel not bad. I think it's a plausible reflection of the society. It's a good system. But the politicians, they do not have the majority. And this is what they want, because they are only 4. Sometimes they had a majority when the Bar Association joined them. So there were 6 out of 9. But 6 out of 9, you cannot appoint a Supreme Court judge if the judges there do not approve. So they had to make compromises. And we have seen many compromises in the last years. So they want to change, of course, this committee. They want to have hearings in the Knesset of the candidates of the Supreme Court. And they want to change and, of course, enlarge the number of judges, not just of representatives of the government, meaning of the politicians in this committee. This is one of the ideas of the reform. And let me say something, if we're talking about the reform, let me say something else about this reform presented. There is a part of the reform that deals with Netanyahu itself, meaning that we want to use the constitutional tools in order to take care of a person and to make what they call a legalization of corruption. They want to erase the crime of fraud and breach of trust, and they want to enact a law that is called the French law for the prime minister that will not allow to investigate or to indict prime minister and ministers during their term. They want to expand the parliamentary immunity and to prohibit, not to allow the court to interfere with Knesset proceedings that deal with immunity. So it means that we will not have a court, we will have 2 kinds of citizens. Okay, equality before the law, which is, I think, a very fundamental idea of the rule of law, will not be here anymore. It will be, let's say, a green pass to a corrupted government, because even if you are a criminal person, nobody will be able to indict you or to investigate you while you are in the Knesset. If you are in the Knesset, you are protected. And if you are outside the Knesset, then you are a regular person. And of course, to delete an offense, if we delete this offense, it means that the trial of Netanyahu, there will be no more public interest to conduct it, because there will be no criminal behavior anymore. And therefore, if this, and they say this is one of the first laws they want to pass, the one that actually deletes this offense. And therefore, according to the criminal law in Israel, if an offense is removed from the criminal code, all cases pending in which persons are accused of this offense will be stopped. And here you have also the part that deals with Netanyahu. Now, I don't want to even insinuate that the legal, the judicial system is perfect. It's perfect in Israel. No, we have many problems, real problems in the judicial system, but this program does not deal with them. Okay, for example, take in Israel the time that it takes for a criminal proceeding. Somebody is indicted, and until the case is finished, it may take 5, 7, 9 years. Just imagine. And here, Netanyahu is a very good cause for that. The indictment against Netanyahu was filed in January 2020. We are in October 2022, and we are hearing, I think, the 10th witness out of 300. Come on. This is a real problem. We have to deal with this problem, but nobody cares. I know of criminal cases that have been going on 9 years. 9 years. Where is, the right of this person? We have other problems. The High Court of Israel is also the Supreme Court of Appeals. One court dealing with 9,000 or 14,000, depending the year, cases per year. You know the number of cases that the Supreme Court of America deals with. Okay. I don't think that 100 will be a right number. 1,500 cases just dealing with constitutional problems. And we have 15 judges. There is no Supreme Court of Appeals, no Supreme Court of Criminal Appeals, no Supreme Court of Civil Appeals, nothing. Just the magistrate courts. This is something that a reform is, we've been asking for this reform for years now. Nobody is dealing with it. This is not interesting. What is interesting is power. So the reform deals only with Netanyahu, and we want more power. That's all. And let me just conclude, and because I see that the time is passing quickly, and I want to give you. We are in a very sensitive time for Israel's democracy. The public debate, and to a large extent also the media coverage, focuses on the central question of the electoral system. To Bibi or not to Bibi? That's the question. Everybody's dealing only with that. But the real question before us is much more fundamental. Will Israel be still a democracy in the next few months? And, Aaron Barak used to say when he was a judge, that if you do not defend democracy, it will not protect you. And if I may quote one of your judges, and I think American Justice Holmes, over 100 years ago, more than 100 years, in 1919, and I will use some of his word, I think the threat to Israel's democracy nowadays is a clear and present danger. Thank you. Now it's up to you.
All right, I think now I'll turn it over to Peter, who is going to monitor the question period.
Okay, we don't have any questions in the chat, although there's a remark. Well, maybe we'll start with this. Paul Friedman rights. Democracy is in danger in both of our nations. And I think that that's a valid point, because our elections on November 8th may be as significant in some ways as the Israeli elections on November 1st. And I would wonder if you have any comment on that, or you're staying on your
No,
side.
I think we will have to have another talk about it and see the result in both countries. And see the results in both countries. I think still I am aware, not very well aware, but I'm aware of what is going on in the United States. Still, I think that even if it's much more divided than it was before, still you have these, shields that protect you. They are there. And even if the Supreme Court, they rendered some cases that I do not agree with them, and I'm sure some of you may not as well, the rules of the game are protected. The rules of the game are protected. You will not see a president coming and saying, okay, I am in power now. All I need is half of Congress and one more, and half of the Senate and one more. And instead of 4 years on a term of 4 and 4, we will take the biblical number of 40. 40 years we walked in the desert, so 40 years for a president of the United States. You will not have it. It will not be possible. Okay, of course, I'm saying that with a smile. But I think still we are in a different position concerning democracy. I hope for both countries that I'm wrong in both cases, that you will have a strong democracy and it will not be in danger, and we will not see a real danger in democracy. I do hope so.
If I can comment, Peter, while I hope more participants will use the chat to raise questions with Professor Navot, I think that Harold may have missed, unless I did not hear it, introducing Professor Navot. And I just want to say that
you're correct, because I didn't know what my role was.
That's fine. That's fine. So
First of all, I'm Susie, and that's it. I'm Susie, and I'm a constitutionalist.
So in the invitation, you have already seen that Susie serves as Vice President for Research at the Israel Democracy Institute and is a world-renowned ex-scholar in the area of constitutional law. So it connects us to, first of all, thanking the IDI, the Israel Democracy Institute, for collaborating with us and allowing us to have Professor Navot and adding their name to this important session. And one cannot over-exaggerate the importance of the IDI, and it sort of connects directly to one of the comments that Professor Navot made earlier. She mentioned that, as an example, the possibility that a law will be passed that divides Israel into a segment of the population that will have more rights and another segment that will have less rights. Now, it doesn't take much imagination to think what would be the one segment and what would be the other. But consistently, one of the other major projects of the IDI is the annual Israel Democracy Index. And the question is being asked, do you support or object to Arabs in Israel having less rights than Jews? And what you see is that the potential makeup of the next coalition, according to one version of the outcome of the result of the elections, do clearly support the notion that Jews will have more rights than non-Jews in the state of Israel. So this is not an extreme hypothetical. It is something that the IDI itself has detected in its important surveys of the status of democracy and democratic principles in the state of Israel.
Before you answer, Professor, I'm going to add a question, a related question from my beloved Cantor. What would it take for the Israeli public to wake up and realize this true and present danger is real? And a related question, is there any method to bring the issue to the public outside the Knesset? Tough questions, but
yes, I can see the chats now, and let me just Bob Herbst, he commented that the rules of the game in the United States are not protected if the U.S. Supreme Court
adopts. That's an interesting question too.
Well, it's not a question, but it's very important what he says, and I suggest that you read it. If the Supreme Court adopts an independent state legislature theory, the elections rules of the game will be changed for the worse. I am aware of that, and I still think that the possibility it happens is it's not a clear and present danger. It's something that is low. I hope so, and I think so. I think that there is a difference when you have to interpret rights, and then when you have to make an interpretation about rule of the games and institutions. I think there is a difference, and I hope that the interpretation will be such as to leave the situation as is. But I think time will teach us more. Orna asked what would take for Israel public to wake up and realize that this true and present danger is real. I don't know, Orna. Really, I don't know. Everybody's talking about it, but there are people that they just do not want to listen. And let me tell you something about the propaganda in Israel. Propaganda in Israel has been going on for a long time now. And when you say something every day, and even if it's a fake, actually it becomes, you start to believe it. The court is seeing as the monster, and the legal system is seeing as the basic problem of Israel. We do not have any other problems, not education, and not, cost of life, and not how much do you pay for an apartment. No, the legal system is the basic. We have been indoctrinated by this sentence. And therefore it's very difficult, and we are working very hard to talk to people, to convince them. Look, okay, it's the court that gave religious people their rights. And it's the court that said that if the Minister of Finance does not want to go on, continuing giving support to Haredi families, he cannot do it. It was the Supreme Court. Who will protect you when you are a minority? But it's difficult. So I don't really know what else to do. Is there any method for Israel for bringing an issue to the public outside the Knesset? Only NGOs, Paul. A political party may be formed, but not now. Political parties may be formed only before the elections, and then you have to register a political party and to run for elections. And I don't know if we will have elections soon or not. I think that in 10 days or 15 days, we will know the answer. But let me tell you something that, it's like homework I give you. The elections in Israel will be on the 1st. We may have a government only, I think, perhaps 3 months from now. But the Knesset will, the Knesset will open its doors on the 15th of November. So there will be people, there will be a Knesset. We will have members of Knesset that they can propose any bill and pass any law if they have 61, even if there's not a government yet. No problem. The law of the two-headed government was passed before a government was formed. The Knesset may start to work as a new, fresh Knesset, even if we do not have a government. And we may not have a government if the situation is 60-60, for example. Okay, then the president will grant the mandate to the first one. The first one has 42 days to form a government. 28, and 14. Then if he does not succeed, at midnight, the mandate on midnight on the day of, on the 42nd day, the mandate, pops out like, like Cinderella, it becomes a pumpkin. Okay, like the courage. And the next morning, the president gives, or within 7 days, the president gives the mandate to a second one, was another 28 days. I hope you're counting the days. And if the second does not succeed, it may go to the Knesset for another 21 days, and the Knesset may also propose a candidate by a majority of 61. So we have a long time to form a government, but the Knesset is there. And if 61 wants them, 61 is absolute power, or almost absolute power.
Okay, since you have the chat, why don't you, next is Richard Horowitz's question, which is really interesting.
Okay, but it's not appropriate for a number of kinds.
Which he suggests that the basic law of human dignity was passed by only 32 to 21.
Richard is completely right.
So,
this is a very, very good, it's a marvelous remark. May I call you Richard? I'm Susie. And will you, not Mr. Horowitz or something. We are at home, so I feel. So I'm at home, so I feel it.
Yeah.
You are right that the basic law on human dignity was passed by a simple majority. There were many problems concerning the basic laws at the time because nobody really knew what a basic law was. Nobody really gave the basic law any constitutional power. Because the Harari resolution decided that the constitution will be formed by basic law, like a salami, by tranches, then nobody actually gave the basic law constitutional status. So therefore, we think that what is good for Israel is if we actually reach a compromise concerning this new basic law of the legislature that will have an override, to give some time for the Knesset to pass again all the basic laws by a majority of 80. Okay, to reinforce them, and then to pass this override clause. And then I think that we will solve, it's a conundrum that we have, because what we did in the past was not good. Nowadays, the last basic laws were passed by a majority of 61. The nation-state law was passed by a majority of 62 versus 55. And what does it tell you? Can a constitution, something that is constitutional, be passed by a simple majority? And I think one of the most important basic laws of Israel, the identity of Israel, Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people. There's nothing more important than that. But because of what it does not have inside, the opposition said we do not accept it. And therefore, that's the majority. The majority rules. This is something wrong. We have to amend it. Thank you, Richard, for the marvelous speech.
Just one remark. The right of judicial review was not inherent in the basic laws even. The Israeli Supreme Court had to find it. So you may want to comment on that. It's like there's an Israeli Marbury versus Madison, how we got to this place.
Well, we got there because of Marbury versus Madison. If there was not Marbury versus Madison, we would not have a constitution, because when the basic law on human rights were enacted in 1992, and the basic laws actually limit the power of the Knesset, it was the first time that the power of the Knesset to pass a law was limited. Not limited technically by a majority, but limited by a nature. You cannot limit, you cannot abridge the rights only if you do it in an appropriate way. So the Knesset was limited. And the court, when a case was brought, it was a civil appeal. It was brought to the court arguing that there is a new law that actually abridges the right to property. And they asked for judicial review, which was unheard of. So the court, in a large 9 judges, a large majority, in the monumental decision of 539 pages, my poor students. Okay, this decided in 1995 that Israel has a constitution, not a strong constitution, not a whole constitution. It called it a lame constitution, but a constitution. And the basic law were in the apex of the Chaldean pyramid. And therefore, if you have a constitution, according to Marbury versus Madison, the role of the court is the guardian of the constitution. So the court has the power of judicial review. And the problem with this decision, that it was rendered 4 days after the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin. So the people did not have the time, and neither the Knesset, to understand Israel was in a completely, in a mode for weeks. It took, I think, the law professors, 3 months to make the first meeting around this case. We had a meeting. I was starting my PhD, and the meeting was called, "Did you understand the case of Mizrahi?" That was the name of, did you understand what they wrote there, that we have a constitution and they have the power for judicial review? And actually, we all understood the same. So we do not have judicial review that is written in the constitution. This new basic law on the legislature will have to say that the court has the power for judicial review, perhaps in a very large bench, etc., etc. But we don't have it right. We and the United States and Israel are the only countries that have judicial review when it's not written anywhere, not in your constitution and neither in our constitution. And let me comment on what Bob said, that the Uri's comment suggests that Israel has not been a real democracy because, and we won't be until Palestinians have equal rights. Well, until, this is something that calls for another, I think, discussion. If the Palestinians will have their own state, then there's no problem. But if it will be a one-state solution afterward, okay, and the Palestinian will not have rights, then it will, okay, there is a new problem. I am concerned because of the Jewish aspect of the country. I want a Jewish state. I made Aliyah to a Jewish state. This is my country. And I don't want it a two-nation state. I want a Jewish state. And therefore, we have to find a solution concerning the Palestinians. And the solution must be along the line that is a democratic line. So I agree that there is a problem there. And there are many propositions for different kind of solutions. We will perhaps sometime talk about it. The basic law, Richard said that basic law in dignity was passed by a plurality, not a simple majority. For me, a simple majority, we do not have quotas. So a simple majority is the number of members of the Knesset that are there. Any law in Israel, any law, can be passed by a majority of 1 versus 0. Okay, or 2 versus 1. We do not have this obligation, like in many countries in the world, that all members of Knesset must be present, have to be present in the moment of voting. What role would you recommend American Jews who care about this?
You have.
This I leave for you.
Yeah, that's a great question. Paul Friedman has.
My heart goes to you. Just speak. Talk. I don't know. Israel is for me. Israel is also your country. You know, you are all potential citizens of Israel. So for me, the connection with the diaspora is very important. And I wish there were many ways to influence. But I know that you will find your way. I am sure of it.
Well, 2 of the sponsors here are United States based, although J-Plan is rooted in both Israel and the United States. So this is a #1 question for a lot of us. So we are wondering what we can do. other than run in circles, yell and shout. If you have any further thoughts on that, I know I'd love to hear that, and I'm sure most everyone on this program would love to hear it too, because as hard as it is in Israel to figure out what to do, it's even harder in the U.S. because obviously our influence is much mitigated by distance, and we're not us not being citizens.
Peter, may I call you Peter?
Please
Peter, you have your own problems. I am sure. I do not envy you. Also, the United States is passing through some difficult times. I can see that. But still, I am sure that you have people in Israel that are part of your life and of your friends. And for the moment, for us, the most important thing is to call out the people that do care for the democracy to come out and vote. That's all. Very simple. I think that sometimes when people are indifferent, and they wake up the next morning and said, okay, my country has changed and I could perhaps do something about it. It may be too late. But I think, first of all, we have to wait. Hopefully all my, these dark ideas will not be put forward. I think, first of all, Netanyahu is an intelligent person, and he was a strong Democrat. I think he lived a long time in the United States, and he got it. But now his personal problems are more important to him than anything else, and therefore this conflict of interest puts him in another situation. If he really wants a 61 majority, he will have to give Smotrich and Rothman and Ben Gvir, okay, Kahana's student, what he wants. And that's the problem. If he wants his freedom from this criminal case, and that's the problem. So I do not know what to tell you, what you can do. I really do not know. I wish I could.
If we're a few weeks ago, we could send out postcards like many of us are doing in the United States, but it's too late for that now. They won't get there in time.
I think Elliot said
we should have thought of that last month.
Support us, that's it. Come and be part of us. I wish you could. I invite you all.
I think the worry we've gone, well, there's one question about adopting a constitution left. And I don't know if you'd like to comment on that. That's not happened since 1947. But Stephen Stone asked, is there any movement of ending an actual constitution? And is there any likelihood that there can be a compromise which will actually result in a constitution?
Each day that passes, it becomes more difficult. It was possible, I think, 20 years ago. Since this populist wave, we and them, it's very hard to speak about compromises. There's so much hatred here. It's unbearable. So therefore, I do not see it. I do not see it in any of the platforms of the parties. Okay? Completing the constitution was part of the platform of the parties, I think 10 years ago. It's not there anymore. I think so. What Gideon Saar actually did, it was a very, very big step forward. He says, I want to reach a compromise, because this new government was formed with Mansour Abbas from an Arab party from the one side, and Ayelet Shaked from Yemina on the other side, and Bennett, of course. So we have the right, the middle, the center, the left, and the Arabs all together in this 8 parties coalition. So let's reach a compromise. He really tried, but it was a very short government. I don't know, perhaps if this sort of government is formed again, I will say that I was a member and nobody fired me. So I will go and try to, to revive this commission again, perhaps with more members of the Knesset. But we really do not know. It will only be possible if not a 61 one-wing right or left is formed. It has to be something that is, a government of both big parties, perhaps, the day after Netanyahu.
Thank you. I just should mention that I had read that United Mizrahi base 400, at least 400 of the 539 pages. It's quite a treat for anyone who wants to attempt it. It is available through Cardozo.
In Israel, we say kol hakavod, all the honors. It's not good. So kol hakavod
waiting
to
for
you.
it to end. With that, I don't see any further questions, so I'm going to turn it back to Uri, I guess.
Thank you, Peter. I hope you remember that I prefaced the session saying this is one of the most important programs we have ever had.
Interrupt. I want to thank you on my own before Professor Navot. It's been an amazing discussion. Sorry, Uri.
That's
Thank you,
quite
Peter.
right. So I hope that having heard Professor Navot, you agree with me. And thank you, Professor Navot, for such a clear, concise presentation that for many who seem to be underplaying the importance of these threats to the legal system, that you have conveyed the severity and the seriousness of the issue, and maybe it's connected to Bob Herbst's comment on the chat, who I think misunderstood what I said regarding the reality that was gauged by the Israel Democracy Institute surveys, that the makeup of a potential government as it stands now, with the Haredi and religious parties and many within the right-wing camp, that favor a change of policy and the change of laws that would grant fewer rights to Arabs than to Jews. And we are talking about Israeli Arabs, not the territories. We are talking about Israeli citizens of Arab descent and Israeli citizens of Jewish descent. Had this been a possible route for legislation, this may indeed happen. The threat is lurking in behind the scenes. It is only the Supreme Court that has blocked that and repeatedly corrected policies that were discriminatory in nature and disfavored Israeli Arabs, and reiterated the principle of equality as a binding principle for the state and its agencies. This state of the law, as mandated by the Supreme Court, may indeed be a jeopardy if a 61 majority made up of groups that primarily support preferential treatment and preferential rights of Jews over Arabs were to become a possibility.
Uri, we've been talking about, there's no doubt about the danger. We've been talking about it ourselves together and with our groups for some time. But the problem we have is there's not a thing we can do about it. If there is that majority that is determined to adopt the feared legislation, we can decry it all we want, but we can't
that's
do so. The reality is, this is a learning session. We're aware of the great danger, but can't prevent it from happening. And can now only, as Professor Navot said, is all we have now is hope that it won't happen.
That's exactly the point. This was intended to clarify to send a message of alarm that one not diminish from the seriousness of the situation. There are articles that appear in the Jewish English language media that play down the threat to democracy in Israel as emanating from the threat to the judicial system. You have read them, I'm sure, and I have read them, and others may have as well. So this is intended indeed as an educational, consciousness-raising session, and one of the answers that was given on the chat as to what can you do, well, the majority of the funds that, for instance, Netanyahu himself raised for his primaries in a previous election campaign came from American donors. I think donors could play an important role as they support Israeli parties. I think donors can play an important role as they support Israeli universities and other NGOs and alert them to their concern over Israel's democratic principles and the rule of law, and rally them in support of this important element of democracy. And of course, one of the suggestions that was made is that people consider direct support of organizations that work to ascertain and strengthen Israel's rule of law, such as the Israel Democracy Institute, and if I may say so, Chidush as well. All right, it's been a great session, Susie. Thank you so much. Thank you, the Israel Democracy Institute. And we will be holding a session shortly after the elections in trying to decipher the results and focus primarily on its impact on matters of pluralism, religion and state, and religious freedom. Stay tuned for further notices. Shalom and goodbye.